So last Rambling GM video, I talked about conversations, and I talked about a problem I had with conversations where they often would come out without giving the players any meaningful information. So they're a little bit mushy, a little bit mysterious, and we talked about avoiding that and planning the conversations out a tiny bit more so that every conversation drove the players forward and drove the plot forward. One commenter, Tom, came back with this comment, which I thought was pretty interesting, and it got me thinking about some stuff. And he said, hey, this might be tangential what you're talking about, but it got me thinking. My most recent campaign wrapped up not long ago, and overall the 6 players gave me lots of positive feedback. However, one player separately admitted they didn't like my style as a DM, in that they were frequently confused as to what to do. I didn't lay out what exactly was the objective of the campaign. He goes on to say, that this was a younger player or the younger in the group, and that he was often confused as to what the quest was, who should they be talking to. Perhaps he wanted more railroading, or perhaps as the DM, Tom didn't give them quite enough, guidance, right? Or that they were used to a different style. So he said, impacting the world in a sandbox can take many forms. This player seemed to be floundering, overwhelmed by too many choices. So interesting comment. And I'm going to pick on that a little bit, and because it got me thinking. It's an interesting concept. How do you keep a sandbox moving? How do you cater to some different play styles? And while giving the players choice, but understanding that a lot of campaigns nowadays are fairly scripted narrative sort of events, right? You have whole campaign books now. Well, I remember before when modules were like 20 pages and a little, thin. Now they are hardback books. They cost a lot of money. You might be doing a whole campaign with one book, and that book is mostly scripted from front to back. There are some maybe choices in there, but it's very rare that you get, say, a D&D 5th edition Sandbox campaign that you bought, that there's not that many of those. So so how do you keep that moving when people are used to this other thing? So here's my map of my current sandbox, but I'm going to go and sort of blank it out here for a second, and let's think about this. So I took some time and I thought for a while about this sort of conundrum and what do we use to keep the sandbox moving? And what I sort of came up with is, in this sandbox, information is king. So just back to the same concept of the conversations, information is king. The more information you can give your players and the clearer that information is, the better. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to be able to make decisions. And so I said, a hex crawl is not enough. I think a lot of folks, when they hear sandbox, they think hex crawl. They think that old school, basic sort of D&D kind of concept of, I got a giant thing of hexes, I got some dungeons, I pepper them together and some towns, and the players go hex to hex to hex, right? And as they run into something, you ran into the flame shrine, so now we're going into the dungeon. And don't get me wrong, I love that style of play, but it's not enough to actually drive that sandbox forward. There's not quite enough elements there. No, some players are just going to go and say, yeah, I've done this. I get the drill. We're doing it, right? And that's fine. And especially if your characters can buy into the, hey, we're just a bunch of murder hobos, powered by money, and we want to make some gold, and we want to, right? I think, and that is a valid campaign for sure. But I don't think it works all the time. It doesn't work with all players. It definitely doesn't jive with the style that I think some folks are used to. I tend to run sort of a half and half kind of campaign where we do have some of that, and this Dawn's Hope campaign is a very much an example of that. We have hex crawls, we have point crawl, of course, because you can see on here there's a lot of points of interest. There is a domain building aspect in that one of the characters, two of the characters are rich nobles trying to build a business enterprise here away from their main families, which are up in this mountain, past this pass here. So you have a lot of that. You have more of a narrative mission based vibe with a couple of the religious characters. So we have a lot of pieces in this campaign, and trying to fold them together is sort of an interesting task. So I say that a hex crawl is not enough, and so what I do, and what I think folks generally should do, is give the players a to-do list. So, and how do you do that? So what I'm saying is that you should seed your sandbox with a ton of rumors, encounters, NPC conversations, maps. Obviously, they can explore and go find things, but even before they even touch the hex map, they should have 3 or 4 or 5 things that you know for them to do, and that they know, we could do that. So literally before they even get out the door, I'm going to go and give them sets of rumors that point them to this shrine or this lair of the ant abbot. Who the hell knows? This actually wasn't a smoking crater before. It was some kind of weird ancient wagon train. The mysterious site, right? All these things are things that, before we even start letting them explore, we say, here are 3 or 4 things you've heard already, right? The list of rumors from the old D&D modules, but each one leads to a possible adventure. And I give them that to-do list because that then narrows their choices down a little bit. Now, they could just tell me, we would just want to go west. I just want to go and see what's out there. And that would be perfectly fine. And we would roll that up. But my players typically don't want to do that. They don't want to just go around a hexman and just see what they find. They're not going to do that. But they do react very well to a list of things that they then get to prioritize and choose from. So that's sort of my first true tip there, is that I would start by giving the folks a list of things that they know are out there, that they know they can do. Start there. And there might be, you might still explore, and they might still have to get there. They still have to reach the flame shrine, which is only 3 hexes away, so not very far. But they still have to reach there. And so in between, I don't know what's there. There could be stuff there. We could random roll some interesting things. But if we don't, they're going to get there. Nonetheless, they have places to go and things to do from the jump, from the get-go. And I think that and this is something that it hits me more and more as I GM more and more and more and more. Say the more info, the better. You don't have to info dump everything, but instead of just giving a vague, well, to the east, I hear there is a temple made of bronze with flame shooting out the roof. At some point I lost, and that's fine. Right? That is fine. And that starts, and that might get them this point on the map. Oh, there's a flame shrine to the east. Maybe we should go check that out. But I'll tell you what's actually slightly better is that if they hear that flame shrine is out to the east, and then sometime later in the game, they also hear that, or they're privy to, because this actually happened in the game. They're actually privy to the information that, and this NPC gathered a group of adventurers, and they headed out there a couple weeks ago. And they came back with their tails between their legs because they get their butts kicked by bronze lizard men that breathed fire. And all of the 5 of them, only 1 of them made it back. And she's in the infirmary. And so that leads to them talking to this the leader of the NPC, the adventuring party, and they can hear all of this story, and now they understand. Well, I won't add limited time, but yeah, they understand maybe the risk and reward. So then they go and they talk to this NPC, and the NPC tells them, oh yeah, we saw a golden statue with jewels encrusted, but But now you had these bronze lizard men, and they fought viciously, and they were tougher than anything I've ever seen, and blah blah blah, and they breathed fire, and you understand the idea, right? Um, and as soon as I get better, I'm going back to get the bodies of my companions because I feel bad that I left them behind. I feel guilty, right? And so now they know. Now they know there's some reward. They have an idea of the risk. We considered ourselves good fighters, but they tore us apart. So now the party's like, oh, that's a big risk, right? But man, that golden jeweled statue sounds like it's worth $5,000. That's a great reward. And they know now that choosing to go there, that's going to entail some danger. They know what they can expect to get. And they also know that there is possibly limited time to do it because this NPC plans to go back as soon as she heals. And indeed, they went off and did something else. In the real campaign, they went off and did something else. And then they started texting the next week about the shrine. And I said, well, what you've heard in town is that a couple NPCs that they did already know, Patrick and this Arwen, did gather 3 more adventurers or 4 more, and then they headed out to the Flame Shrine. So now everybody's considering whether will that group make it back, and do they need to go rescue that other group, and we'll see what happens in the future. But the more information you give them, the better, not just the one-liner. I do love those rumors that are one-liners. They leave a lot of things open, but I think the more information you can give to folks, then they can actually make a choice. If I just say there's a flame shrine, then there's a whole lot of tacit assumptions with that flame shrine. Well, I mean, or no assumptions. I shouldn't say there are tacit assumptions. In a lot of games, there will be assumptions made, which is, well, that flame shrine must be of our level, right? It must be doable because he said it and didn't say anything else. Now, some games that won't be the case. Some games it will. That's up to you and your GM and your party. But again, I already told them you had 5 experienced adventurers go, and 1 of them came back. So they now think that place is dangerous. But they could also use the golden jeweled statue for the thousands of bucks, right? They're very intrigued by that. So the more information, the better. Because, again, you want them to make decisions, and decisions are best made with information. I don't consider like my game to be like a fog of war sort of thing. I'm not asking them to peel back layers. I'm trying to give them information, so we have in the campaign a whole host of other NPC adventuring parties, prospectors, trappers, traders, hunters, all in this land trying to make a living. They are continuously bringing back intelligence to the town about what is out there. So I'm continuously switching pins on this board, and the PCs are going, okay, this week, what do we have? What can we do? What seem to be their priorities? What seems to be dangerous? What seems to be lucrative? And keep in mind that I think one thing that's important that we often forget, given that we're all adults with time constraints and so on, we should reinforce this list as best as possible between sessions. We need to remind people. Some people play once a week. We play once a week. We're very fortunate in that case. Some people play once every 2 weeks. Other groups might meet once a month or once every 2 months or like some crazy. And in the meantime, your players have forgotten all about the list. They haven't thought about it. Reinforce the list between sessions. Ask people to give you feedback between sessions about what they might be interested in. Encourage your players to have a conversation in between sessions that will allow you to overhear things they want to do. We're actually going to get to that in a second. I also do a quick recap during the week, not of the whole adventuring session, but I recap and say, oh, by the way, by my reckoning, there are 4 things out there for you to do. There's the Flame Shrine. There's this rumors of this ant abbot down to the southeast. If you recall the mysterious site, which was spotted by prospectors back in week 1, and there is a bounty on Hellcats over here by the nobles, by this mineral deposit, and so on and so forth. We go over the list, and I say, look, I need you to I need to figure out what kinds of things you're interested in. By my reckoning, these are the 5 things I've had on your list, or the 4 things, or whatever. Now, can they come to me and say, we don't want to do any of that. We would like to do this other thing. We want to go talk to the Hillhounds, which we've met, the Goblin Tribe we've met here, and open up trade conversations. Done. I'm in. I'm perfectly in. I don't care that they follow my 4 or 5 things, but I want them to know that they're there. And then maybe I put that on the list. It's a 5th thing. Oh, right. You wanted to do that. That's another thing on the list. I will put that. And then one of the things I one of the things I do is I listen to their conversation, right? It's over text. It's on a group chat or whatever. And I use that to, and I use that to help seed information. So knowing what they're interested in and what they're not interested in allows me to start then moving the mechanisms of the game to make sure they have the information I think they need to make a good choice about what to do and how to go about it. So if they say, well, we're very interested in the Flame Shrine, but they've never mentioned this mysterious site, maybe they're not going to get to it. Maybe it's just not that pressing or not that intriguing. Like, no one seems to be interested in it. So what that tells me is, that's fine. Either I need to seed more rumors or more information, or they're just not interested. Someone else is going to do that, and take it, and that will be wiped off the map. It will be cleared by some other party, right? So use what they're talking about to fill gaps. Even if it's just during the text and they say, well, I'd like to go to the Flame Shrine, but I'm not sure that X, Y, or Z. You can go, well, you can, I mean, again, don't necessarily push them one way or the other. But if you see a question there where you go, well, I could give them that information, they might be able to pick that information up in town. Maybe you do pick up that information, or maybe you just make a note in your GM notes of who has that piece of information. So that if they start asking around, you have a ready answer for them. So I use their conversation to start seeding some of what's going to pop up. Not just to plan the next adventure, but to plan all the other seeds that need to get dotted around here so that they can start making choices about what the next adventure and the adventure after that is, etc. And of course, as much as possible, I give my information to the players in the simulation, as it were. And what I mean by that is, it's through NPCs, it's through contacts, it's through events in town, right? I didn't just tell them, hey, Kay Arwen and her adventuring party went out to the Flame Shrine and got beat. They were there when it happened, right? Oh, you hear someone yelling, open the gates, and she comes stumbling in, burned, and, still, right, and the priestess was there to heal her and take her to the doctor, etc., right? The whole thing. They were there when it happened. So we give information in the sim, and I'm okay with that. And that's what I try to do as often as possible, because it's more fun. I think it's more, what do you want to say? Right? It gets players into it. It gives the feeling that the world is alive and around and stuff is happening without them. And, some of the events are outside of them, which is nice. But having said that, I do not mind giving information in the game, not in the simulation, but just outside of the simulation with respect to the game. And what I mean by that is, and I don't do this all the time, but there are times when I feel it's perfectly appropriate. When you don't have a real good in-sim way to tell someone something, sometimes you can just go and give them the information. So as a for instance, and this isn't an actual example yet, but let's say that they know that the Cutters are a goblin tribe. and they know that they're preparing for war, as a for instance, and they are preparing for war, but the PCs have a bunch of other things to do. I might go to the PCs and go, that's fine. You've heard the cutters are preparing for war, so that's a no. But you're not going to investigate. That's fine. Here's what I'm going to say, though. I might say to them, every month, I'm going to roll a d12. And on a 3 or less, let's just say, that situation's going to change for the worse. I'm not saying you have to deal with it, but I'm saying that the situation will progress. So when I have a clock, I know that some games and some campaigns have this concept of like a clock where things will tick and so on. I will tell them sometimes just in game terms what I am doing behind the scenes to determine whether those clocks move or whether something happens. Or I will sit there and go, I have a random list of 12 things that are going to happen this month, and I'm going to roll this twice, and you see one of those things might be that the goblins show up. So just so you know, there are possible consequences. The chance might be low. Here's the chance. You can make the choice. And again, so that, and here we go. Here's my last thing on that, is that, and some meta info is okay. Don't always think everything has to be perfectly in character, right? You can give them some information out of character as players and let them in on the joke, let them in on the secret and say, here's how I'm determining this. So you have an idea of, do we care, right? And that gives, and again, I don't feel it's a bad call, because strangely enough, in my experience, and this, your mileage may vary, but in my experience, when they know some of the mechanisms behind, they're actually more invested in some of those mechanisms. When you hide all of the mechanisms, and I think you should hide some of the mechanisms of the game and the GMing and what you're doing, I do. But when you give them that little glimpse and say, the goblins are going to go to war, every month I'm going to roll, and on a 3 or less, that situation changes. So it might go from they're not ready to a ready stance to they're marching. Strangely enough, now the players can be invested in the mechanic, can roll it on the table, for crying out loud, and they'll be, anticipating, either hoping that it holds off for another month so they can get their agendas done, or or anxious for it to happen so that they can get that battle moving that they prepared for. So let them in on the joke a little bit. Let them in on those secrets sometimes, and tell them, hey, we are going to calculate this thing. Here it is, and this is how I'm calculating it, and now you're in on it, and now you can see and now make decisions based on it. And the more information you give them and the more power that you give them in that sense, they will appreciate, I feel, and and then base their decisions and make good decisions now based on the information that they have. And I think to be honest, a lot of this is saying the same thing, which is the first line: information's king. The more information you can give them and the better information you give them, you are then allowing them to make decisions. That makes them powerful. That gives them agency. That's really the goal of your sandbox. So hide less, frankly. I think my other sort of take on the situation that Tom presented was just don't be afraid to weave narrative stuff into your sandbox. Don't be afraid. So keep in mind, there's no reason for all these NPCs that are sort of hanging out doing stuff in the campaign. It's not just the players that drive the story. The NPCs also get to drive some of the story, right? So the NPCs also have to-do lists. Give them to-do lists. Mark things off periodically. Say, well, that must be done. It's been 3 months. That's done. Or I rolled a skill check. That's done. Kay Arwen is healed from her burns. She's now looking for an adventuring party. And I wouldn't actually I would even go to the point of literally making to-do lists for NPCs and just giving she'll get that done on a 50% chance this month, or she'll get this done on a 60% chance. Roll it, bam, she did it, crossed off, done. Or if you want to even do skill checks, if you have NPC stat sheets, say, well, she has to make a carousing check to get this done this month, and she does. She's now found her next party to go in there. But as they do that, keep in mind there's no reason why they're not asking, coercing, or hiring the PCs to help them. So here's the thing, all of a sudden, you still have a sandbox. Some of the mechanisms of that sandbox that the NPCs are doing crap. Some of the NPCs doing crap involves the PCs. Now you have what that player wanted, strangely enough, back in the original question. You have a narrative mission now that's been generated by your sandbox. What if Kay goes to the PCs and says, hey guys, heard you were out in the West doing this other work. I really need someone to come with me to the Flame Shrine to get the dead bodies of my fallen comrades because I feel guilt leaving them there. Would you come with me? Now they have a quest. They know who to talk to. They have a direction. It's immediate. They have a narrative mission generated from the sandbox. And there you go. And now this player has what they wanted out of that game a little bit. You have certainly factions. You have NPCs. Those NPCs are going to have desires and needs and to-do lists. And those to-do lists, if you make them involve the PCs, now you have a sandbox and narrative, and you swap them back in and out all the time. You go, the PCs can say no, by the way, to that request. And go, no, we have to deal with the goblins down in the woods because they're preparing for war. Or they might say, the goblins can wait. We need to go do this for this person that we know in town. Or they might go and think, well, if Kay's looking for help, maybe we should beat her to the... they can do their own thing and even go, we're going to beat her to the Flame Shrine and get that statue, that 5,000 gold piece statue, darn it. We're getting it. Not her, we're going to get it. But my point is, you can weave narrative missions in. So events. So I would absolutely have tables of random events that I would happen in town. I would sit there and I would think of what each NPC wants to do. And I would think, does this potentially involve the party or not? Does this event potentially involve the party or not? And when it does, you present them with that, and now it's either another thing on their to-do list or it's a narrative mission. But in any case, they don't have to necessarily do all the driving. And I think that's what that player in Tom's original comment sort of ended up with is, man, do I have to literally tell the GM what we're doing every week? And the answer is no, you don't every week. Some weeks you do. And some weeks I'm going to ask you if you want to do this thing. And you're going to tell me. And then, again, so that all comes down to then we use the narrative missions to power the sandbox. We use the sandbox to create narrative missions. And then that creates a nice feedback loop. And in the meantime, every so often, you just ask the players what they want to do. And they have this nice list of things they can do. Done. And that's sort of how I run my sandbox, is to-do lists, strangely enough, honey-do lists. That's sort of how we run things. So, in any case, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Hope this was interesting, helped. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Tell me in the comments. I will talk to you all later, and have a good afternoon.